checking. There we go. Yeah, thanks very much. Insert obligatory joke here about being the last, presentation slot. It's either the best for last or they put us last because, why are you all still here? How did you make it this far? So we'll see which one it is. We'll see which one it is. So, all right, learning objectives. What are we here for? Uh-oh, wah, wah, boring, learning objectives. What about quests, though? Anyone play video games? Okay, my people. Does anyone play World of Warcraft? My people, Hoarder Alliance, right? Okay, so huge gamer, it's all I do, right? Well, cybersecurity is thrown in there every now and then, but huge gamer. So let's talk about quests, right? Not learning objectives. What are we here for? The first thing we're going to talk about is the difference between DR, IR, and BCP. Commonly confused, thrown around. Let's talk about the differences between them. We'll also, of course, the meat and the potatoes, we'll go through the steps to create a disaster recovery plan. Really, that's broken down into 3 different parts. We're going to first identify stuff, everyone gets that, and then we'll document various forms of contingencies in the plan itself, and the very end, we got to test and maintain that plan. So ultimately, the end of the day, does everyone know what this thing is, right? This is a piece of paper. We want to produce a disaster recovery plan that might be on paper. We still use paper, folks, right? I don't know. So no, you don't have to have your DRP printed on paper, but that's the end of the day. That's our goal today, is talk about how to get a nice plan on paper. So let's start with the first learning objective. What is a disaster recovery plan? How does it compare? Anyone confused about them? We have so many contingency plans out there. It's just job security, right? You develop one contingency plan and let's go make another one, What's the difference? So really, these are 4 common ones you might hear about. Emergency response plans are really kind of the physical security stuff in my mind, the active shooter scenarios, the fire scenarios. But then we have the more cyber IT stuff, the BCPs, the IRPs, the DRPs. Let's figure out how they differ. Start with disaster recovery. What is it? This is my definition of a disaster. It is any event that results in a long-term and or widespread IT service outage. And it may require operating at an alternative location. It's any event that results in a widespread and or long-term outage. Any event. We'll look at what some of those events are. And ultimately our goal is just to restore operations as quickly as possible. And we do that typically through actually not just restoring, but rebuilding, restoring, and recovering. We'll look at the differences between them. And a few acronyms. DR, of course, is disaster recovery. DRP is that nice piece of paper or PDF we're going to get for the plan. And the DRT, the disaster recovery team, those are the folks who will actually implement what's in the plan. So what causes a disaster? Any event that results in a widespread and or long-term IT service outage. Could be physical stuff, canonical examples, right? The volcanoes, the earthquakes, the whatever that takes down your on-premises server room. We also have cyber attacks. What's this, Jason? I thought, cyber attacks, that's incident response. That has nothing to do with disaster recovery. Not quite. Severe cyber attacks, right? Like ransomware scenarios, encrypt all of your systems. Of course, contain, mitigate the harm, but you gotta rebuild, restore, recover those systems. So severe cyber attack can lead to you invoking your disaster recovery plan. Other things as well. Hardware, software failures, right? Remember, the CrowdStrike incident last year, the blue screen of death thing, that should cause, in my opinion, organizations to implement their disaster recovery plan. And also human error. This year there was a issue with Cloudflare's, DNS resolver 111, and also internet's out for long time or it's widespread. Disaster recovery is implemented. A plan should help you with any of these things. We all have different scenarios that would cause us to invoke our disaster recovery plan, right? Pretty intuitive. These are high-level stuff. So let's get more confused. You can all read and memorize this slide, right? It's an awesome use of PowerPoint, Jason. So we love cracking open NIST special publications. Unironically, I do. Put your feet up, get a glass of whatever. I'm a milk guy. I don't know, that's weird. Ooh, yeah, my survey results are going way down right now. Ooh. Oh, I actually have 45 slides. which is like a slide a minute, this is insane, right? This is awful. So this is gonna be really fun. Brian, if I go over a minute on a slide, just shout at me, right? Next, okay, yeah. Get the hook, drag me off, yeah. So, jokes aside, this is really NIST's canonical, disaster recovery thing, right? I really recommend reading it if you haven't. It's their contingency planning guide, and oh my gosh, they outline so many different types of contingency plans, continuity of operations, crisis communications. There's a BCP up there, incident response plan. We're gonna zoom in on DRP and what's really important here, another jargon, the ISCP, the Information System Contingency Plan. Your DRP is going to contain ISCPs, typically in an appendix, and those are going to specifically say, here's how I restore Active Directory, here's how I restore wireless, here's how I restore whatever IT system you have. So today we're really talking about DRPs and ISCPs. Note, interestingly, NIST says the purpose of a DRP is to provide procedures for relocating information systems. Remember, in my definition, it was widespread and or long-term outage that may require relocating. I'm just expanding it out there to make it more realistic, because I think every organization should have a disaster recovery plan. A lot of times organizations like, I don't need one. We're simply not capable of relocating our information systems. We don't have other footprints, right? We don't have stuff in the cloud, right? No. I'm not disagreeing with NIST here, just taking a more expansive view of disaster recovery. So let's zoom in to now my final slide on this first learning objective at Quest, people. Final slide here is what's the difference between IRP, DRP, and BCP? So maybe a little hard to see. We have a bad thing that occurs, right? IT professionals here, we have to figure out, is the bad thing short-term impact or a long-term impact? If it's a short-term impact, we're probably going to be an incident response thing. Now that contradicts with my example, right? Disaster recovery, could be widespread and or long-term. So disaster recovery scenarios could be short-term, like the Cloudflare incident, right? Like the CrowdStrike incident. But just for this sake, just in general, incident response in general, short-term, we have to follow through the incident response life cycle, right? We're gonna contain, eradicate, and recover. While IT is doing the incident response plan, the rest of the organization does business continuity. They're following whatever's in the BCP. Okay, this IT service is down. How do I keep doing payroll, right? The same is true on the other side for disaster recovery. IT, we're doing our disaster recovery plan. We're gonna follow through the disaster recovery life cycle. We'll talk about that later, different than the incident response life cycle. But notice, the rest of the organization is doing the BCP. The rest of the organization arguably doesn't care whether it's an incident or a disaster for an IT perspective. The system's down. I just gotta keep doing payroll, right? And we'll communicate to them how long, expected restore times, et cetera. But does this make sense how the plans work together? Everyone at your organization should know the BCP. Not everyone needs to know the IRP or the DRP. Only the folks on those teams in general need to know those, right, in general. The notes at the bottom too, sometimes our incident response plan, we'll start implementing that, and it might lead to us also using our disaster recovery plan at the same time, ransomware scenario, right? So in general, these are the differences between DR, IR, and business continuity. Hopefully that makes sense, because I'm about to give you all a reward. And that's accomplishing your first quest. Congratulations, woo! Yeah, let's go! What's your reward? So video games, people, video games. This is from Defense of the Ancients, old school, League of Legends people might have heard of. This is old school stuff here. Ripped that icon right off Google Image Search, folks. So you get the Mantle of Intelligence. Intelligence +1. Feeling good? Love it. All right, well, you're gonna get 3 more rewards if we somehow make it through this thing together. So let's do it. What are our other learning objectives? Now let's talk about the steps to create a disaster recovery plan, starting with the very first one, the identification. Ooh, we love identify, right? Every NIST framework ever, identify, identify, identify. It's really important. And that's where I start with most organizations. They don't have adequate identification. Hey, Jason, help us make a disaster recovery plan. I sit down, I talk to them, and I'm like, you have no idea what your environment's like. We're not even gonna get to disaster recovery for a while, because we gotta do A, B, C, and D before we can even talk about disaster recovery, right? So let's talk about A, B, C, and D. What is the identify steps? Actually, let's talk about all of the steps to create a DRP. Here they all are in one slide. We're gonna go through each of these, break them down. Don't worry about this yet, we'll come back to it. First steps, identify attack surface and priorities. What are these 4 steps we're gonna look at? Risk assessment, BIA, defining different recovery objectives, the RTOs and the RPOs, and mapping our infrastructure. All right, so risk assessment, oh my God, we love risk, folks. Did anyone attend a talk at all at this conference that didn't mention the word risk? So next slide, right? No, so, you know, joking, I have a love-hate relationship with the concept of risk in cybersecurity that is a much longer discussion over a glass of milk we can talk about. You know, so risk assessment, I mean, we all know what it is, right? Threats are phenomenological. Threats are just theoretical things that could harm us. Once we analyze the threat to see if it harms us based off its likelihood and impact, now we have a risk. The risk is the product of the analysis of a threat. Cool. So we've done that exercise, we have our risk register, we have our risk matrix. Legitimately, it can help us figure out, you know, what impacts our business, right? Cybersecurity, IT, we're not in silos, we have to support the business. You know, long story short, I find that risk assessments are most helpful to organizations that are either brand spanking new at cybersecurity, they have really no cybersecurity program, they're just starting out, or they're really good for organizations that are really mature. They have lots of programs and procedures in place. They're doing vulnerability management, patch management, identity management, network architecture, data lifecycle, third-party vendor management, listed on and on. Maybe they haven't done risk assessment. Now we can actually tie all of their controls to something demonstrable that makes sense in the business speak, right? If you're kind of in the middle ground there, do you have to do a risk assessment to do a disaster recovery plan? Maybe not. You should, right? You should. So all of these steps that I have for you today, don't feel like, you know, if disaster recovery, you need one right now. Make it work for you, adaptable and practical to your organization. So should you do a risk assessment? Yes. But we kind of know what that entails. What about the next step? A BIA, a business impact analysis. Wordy slide here. Long story short, I love doing BIAs. It's really an analysis of business functions and what IT resources are needed for that business function. So it's really great. You get IT to meet with all the departments at the organization, finance and HR and whomever else, and you sit them down, and you turn the lights off, and you shine the flashlight under your chin, you know, interrogation style, and you're like, all right, what are your critical functions? You know, and they're like, what the heck are you talking about, right? So you ask them, what is it that you do? What is mission critical? And what IT resources do you need to do that mission critical thing? And then you figure out how important those are. What's their maximum tolerable downtimes? Let's put a criticality ranking on them, right? And you get a really good list. This is really important for IT. We tend to be in silos, right? We get to meet with all the departments, we get them on board, and remember, what do all the other departments in the organization follow when a bad thing happens to IT? The business continuity plan. And what does a BIA directly lead to? A business continuity plan. So a BIA by itself, you might not have workarounds in it. You're just taking note of critical functions, IT dependencies, but you can also talk about workarounds. Okay, finance, if this system goes down, how do you keep doing finance stuff? And they'll let you know maybe. Also note, some business functions may have temporal dependencies, meaning the IT resource is more important at some times than others. The financial software is really important bi-weekly when it does payroll and maybe not so much other, right? Just there's nuance that you can capture through all this. You get some really interesting information. I love doing BIAs. How does it look as an example? Hard to see here. I don't know, let's take the business office. What's your critical function? What's one of your critical functions? Payroll. Okay, in order to do payroll, what IT resources do you need? Well, we have our business software. We also, do M365 for stuff. There's also the banking software. That's interesting. Yeah, we don't manage it as the organization, but we have to log into M&T Bank or whatever to to send the Nacha file, the payment file that we get from the business management software. And then there's also, of course, the internet. The list goes on. What sorts of stuff do you track here? Right? This is all condensed. It would be more detailed, but to fit on a PowerPoint slide, we have the use case and impact, and it should say workaround. So in this, it's really a BCP very light. What's our workaround if the business management software is down? We'll try to rerun the last payroll. We can't do payroll if the business management software is down, so we're just gonna contact the bank and see if they can rerun payroll for us. Interesting stuff to talk about. Well, how does this help you for disaster recovery? It gives you a sense of, if you don't have asset management, both hardware and software down, this gives you that list that you're generating asset management lists, and it helps you to figure out recovery priorities. So, what else is on here? We have 2 more steps for our first steps to making a disaster recovery plan in the identify area, and that is the define recovery objectives. Oh, we love our RPOs and our RTOs and our WRTs and MTDs, right? When I was learning cybersecurity, it took me like 3 years to, I still don't know them, folks. I had to write them down for you. I'm just kidding. But yeah, so we've heard these terms, right? You want to get a general sense of them. Do you have to get them down to the exact, minutia? No. RPO, recovery point objective, basically how often do you want to conduct backups? How much data could you tolerate losing? Recovery time objective is how long it would take to restore a system from a backup. Your work recovery time is interesting. That's how long it would take for your restored system to start being usable again by the rest of your colleagues. Maybe it's instantaneous, maybe it would take some time. You gotta communicate to them, hey, it's back up and running, here's how you log in, here's the data, whatever. And your maximum tolerable downtime is the sum of the RTO and the work recovery time. Wow, it would sure be nice if we had an illustration for this, right? Oh, cool. So Google image search, I don't know where I got this from, but I love this image, I use it all the time. But it kind of shows you here, right? You have the bad thing that happens in the red star, and your RPO is basically how much data can you tolerate losing in theory. So conduct backups to have the smallest RPOs you can tolerate, right? And your RTO, you want that as small as possible. You want IT to be trained on restoring from backups so you can get up and operational again. This makes sense? You've seen this? Good. Okay, get a general sense for this stuff. All right, last one. This one's really important. Map your infrastructure. I work with a lot of different organizations. We'll use a school district as an example here because I work with a lot of school districts. And a lot of folks, do you have a network map? Yeah, and oh boy, we've seen the gamut of network maps. We all love the ones drawn on a napkin with a crayon all the way up to this massive Visio file that's like, I would prefer the napkin at this point, you know what I mean? Like, just give us something that works. So let's map the infrastructure. Go through these questions. I'm gonna phrase this as, where can you break the chain? So once you map your stuff, picture breaking how your stuff works. Where would the impact be if you broke the chain somewhere? So here's an example. We have a hub and spoke network here. There's 3 schools at the bottom: elementary school, middle school, high school. They all connect to the MDF, the server room at, let's say, the district office. And there's some organization in the middle here in red called BOCES. For those who don't know, BOCES is kind of like it's an educational institution in New York State, and they support school districts. A lot of school districts get their internet access through BOCES. It kind of serves as their ISP, or BOCES might host services on behalf of school districts. So they're really important partners for districts. Some use their services, some don't. In this case, for this district, they use BOCES both for internet and to host some services there. You can see there's a Active Directory, some backups are there, and their financial software is hosted there. And then, of course, we got the good old internet at the top, the cloud, SaaS applications. What would happen, organization, if we broke your chain right here? Someone's getting a new turf field. Uh-oh, they dug through the fiber line. School A is down, no internet connection. What would that impact be? We can quickly see what it is by looking at the map, right? School A is down, but the rest of the district should be fine. What happens if we broke the chain here? Uh-oh, the entire district is down, right? This is the fire in the data center. There's no other redundancies. There's no other internet connections. There's no, the other district buildings don't have direct connections to BOCES. That district is down. Disaster recovery plan, right? What happens if we broke the chain here? Same thing. You got some LAN stuff going on. You do some internal communication, but essentially the same thing. What happens here? Your backup, your secondary domain controller's down at BOCES. Yeah, not bad, right? We have some redundancy here because we have another domain controller on-prem. What happens if we broke the chain up here? Software, the student information system's down in the cloud, unless you're somehow pulling down backups from that, right? Or you might just be down. Do you get a sense here? You have to figure out what would cause you harm. And you're able to do all this because you kind of know your risk, your business impact analysis, right? So another example, semi-hub and spoke. I work with a lot of districts who proudly say, hey, we have, Jason, get a load of this. We have 2 internet service providers now, 2 different connections. I'm like, that's awesome, super cool. You know why? Because if you break the chain here now, you're probably still good, right? Unless somehow you couldn't, because of the routing, you couldn't access the services that were hosted at BOCES, whatever, right? But in general, congratulations, district. Uh-oh, what happens if we break the chain here again? Your second internet connection does you absolutely nothing, right? So there's no right or wrong answer for how your stuff should be architected, besides, of course, your risk tolerance, all that stuff. Just get a sense for what would cause you harm. Map this stuff out. All right, last piece here, mesh architecture. Of course, where can we break the chain? If you break the chain anywhere, you have a lot more fault tolerance here, right? We all want to be here, in theory. Maybe it's not realistic for your budget or your workloads, but this would be nice, right? Your disaster recovery plan is going to look very different depending on whatever your architecture is. So my last slide for you before, spoiler alert, you get another reward, is what about the cloud? And I'm doing you a huge disservice here because here's the cloud slide, right? Where we talk about the cloud. Jokes aside, what about the cloud, right? And all those network maps we were looking at, we had the internet up top there, we had some SaaS applications. The cloud is a huge part of disaster recovery. When it was first coming out, people were like, we don't need disaster recovery, we're in the cloud now, right? And then the cloud takes care of DR. We know that's not true. What about the cloud? You can have backups into the cloud. You could use, specific Azure services or other services to put your data in the cloud. That's great. Map that on your architecture maps and figure out where it would break the chain. You can also replicate a lot of data in the cloud. You can have full DR as a service in the cloud, right? But you also have to figure out now you have more potential things that could break, which is your networking, your connectivity to the cloud. So a huge disservice here. I hope I'm not, cheating anyone out of like, how do we do disaster recovery with the cloud? We'll look at some other steps later on, I promise. But just keep in the back of your mind those maps that we were looking at, they didn't have cloud stuff on it, but you would do the same practices. Just because you have stuff in the cloud, map it out, figure out what could break the chain. Okay. Quest number 2 complete, people. Congratulations. Woo! We have another reward. That's the Staff of Wizardry. It never looks like a staff to me. It's like a baseball mitt or something. But that has been the icon for the Staff of Wizardry in Dota for 25 years. So congratulations. You now have 3 intellect. This one gave you 2. The Mantle of Intelligence was only 1. So we're feeling smart here, folks. We're feeling smart. Very good. We went through these steps to identify your attack surface and priorities. Now that we kind of get a sense of our organization, what's important, what we have, now we have to figure out contingencies to protect it. This is the meat and potatoes of disaster recovery. Let's go into it. So we need to figure out a disaster handling life cycle, the DRT, roles and responsibilities. We'll talk about backups. Potentially operating at alternative sites. Remember, that was kind of NIST definition. Disaster recovery is operating at alternative sites. And then those ISCPs, arguably the most important part of a disaster recovery plan. So Let's select a disaster handling lifecycle. What is a handling lifecycle? It's just a logical framework to follow for disaster recovery. This is so your whole team kind of gets what the steps are. Probably makes sense for IT folks, but you might have other non-technical staff on your disaster recovery team. You know, this gives everyone a hook to follow. What you're seeing on the screen here is the incident handling lifecycle from NIST. So NIST actually just came out like 2 months ago, their new updated incident handling guide, and they changed the incident handling lifecycle. I'll be honest, folks, I kind of like the older one better. Because, you know, maybe you've seen this before, it's really good, right? That's where the prepare, detect, and then you contain, eradicate, and recover, and you might have to oscillate back and forth between them. I don't want to go down this rabbit hole. This isn't an incident response presentation, but now the new incident handling lifecycle from NIST it's all mapped to the NIST CSF, which I think loses some nuance, but you know, whatever. What's a disaster handling lifecycle? I haven't seen one. At least not from NIST, that contingency planning guide. It doesn't really have a disaster handling lifecycle in there like there is for incident response. Some other organizations have their own posted. Here, you know, I'm such a trustworthy guy. Here's my disaster handling lifecycle. Modify it to your will. There's no, you know, no copyright on this slide here. So what is the disaster handling lifecycle, my opinion? We start off, of course, with analyze. Let's figure out what is impacting us, what's out, what could have caused it. And then we may need to contain the harm. Optional, depending on what the disaster is. Fire in the data center, put the fire out. Ransomware scenario, try to contain that, right? You might need to do containment before you rebuild, restore, recover. Also optional, we may need to think about relocating services, spinning up new stuff in the cloud, turning on your warm site or a cold site somewhere, right? But then we get into the actual disaster steps, rebuild, restore, recover. In general, logically, we have to replace any systems that were damaged. Once we replace them, we buy new ones, or we get spare ones, or we spin up new ones. Then we can restore them, configuration files, backup data, and then we can actually recover, meaning, great, they're restored, now organization, let's start using it. So I would recommend, you know, if you're building a new disaster recovery plan, follow a disaster handling lifecycle, just logically it'll be in the plan. This is the one that I like to use. All right, now number 2, roles and responsibilities for the disaster recovery team, pretty self-evident. IT director, CIO, whomever, probably going to be the DRT lead. And then you're going to have a lot of subject matter experts, SMEs, who are responsible probably for your specific systems. It's IT focused, it's IT heavy. You might have your help desk help triage, you know, user reports for errors, and the help desk is like, follow your BCP, right? Because, you know, that would be cool. And then you might have other leaders as well. Certainly leadership, you want someone from leadership involved, but remember, these folks, business lead, communications lead, HR lead, they might have to be following the BCP while DR is going on. So they might not be able to have a full-time stake on this disaster recovery team. Figure out what works for you. And don't forget to include your third-party partners, right? So we have our DRT established. I'm sort of breezing through that, but I think it's sort of self-evident. And now we get to backups. So I'm gonna call this a backup schedule, but really we're talking about a lot of different things here. I'm not a backup solutions architect, and I'm sure, you know, some folks in here probably know a lot more about this in detail than I do. But here's how I like to think about it with organizations. Do you have a backup schedule? Yes, we do, Jason. And that's typically the end of the conversation, right? So we have to poke at it a little bit more. Okay, what's being backed up? How often is it being backed up? Where are the backups stored, right? So there's kind of 3 different concepts here that's important to keep in mind for disaster recovery. Forgive me a lot of words. Backups, time-stamped copy of data, typically stored in a different form of medium than where the data came from. Data in one system, we're backing it up to another system, now they're separate. Cool. There are different types of backups. We got fulls, incrementals, synthetics, blah, 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 blah. There's a whole bunch. Figure out what type of backup is being performed, because the type really matters for how you might have to restore. And then of course we have snapshots. Some folks are like, are VM snapshots good enough for backups? Think of them as short-term backups. We really want to try to be making full backups of all of our critical systems in separate systems, because snapshots typically we're living on the same system as where the data came from. So we're talking about backup schedule, and that's what a backup is. But we also have replication, right? That's where there's multiple copies of the data. Now, replication can refer to systems themselves replicating data. Your domain controllers are somehow replicating data between them, or your backups themselves can replicate. So you back up to one backup device, and that backup device replicates the data to other devices. We have to pay attention to, what data is being replicated. Replication can be synchronous, asynchronous, in different configurations, active-active, active-passive. This stuff, there's a lot of nuance to this. And then we have another component, redundancy. That's having multiple instances of a component to avoid a single point of failure. So when we were looking at breaking the chain in those network maps, that organization had a domain controller on-prem and a domain controller at BOCES. That's redundancy. If a system fails that is redundant, then you can have failover, where another system takes its place, right? I'm getting a sense, pretty, we're on point with this. There's no furiously quizzical looks I'm getting, which is good. So, jokes aside, this is really have to go in depth on this stuff for backup schedules. Figure out what's being backed up, how replication is occurring, and where there are system redundancies. How do we figure that out? Good old questions. Good old questions. There's a kind of a backup schedule at the bottom, really hard to see. Put it in Excel, wherever. It doesn't have to be fancy, but really figure this out. This needs to be in your disaster recovery plan, right? You ask almost every organization I've worked with, do you have backups? Yep. Can you tell me how they work? Gets a lot messier. Gets a lot messier. Figure this out. So what are the best practices in general? Of course, back up all of our critical systems. We all know 3, 2, 1, right? 3 copies of data, 2 different mediums, one, at least one offsite. Consider that. Try to maintain backups as often as you need for recovery point objective purposes. And make sure you're testing your backups, of course, to have a low RTO. And ensure, especially for incident response type stuff, consider your backups at least having one copy that's immutable, read once, write many, or air gapped, because we don't want our backups becoming compromised. And then we can't use them. So really, really important, figure out our backups, get them documented. What else? 2 more for this middle step, contingency plans. We need to figure out steps for activating an alternative site. So, key question I like to ask folks, what would you do if your MDF was destroyed? If you're a smaller organization, you have one server, here's the server room, what would you do if that went down, right? Do you have anything like a hot, cold, or warm site? Can we think about putting stuff in the cloud? Can we think about having at least another core switch somewhere with whatever it needs to operate? This is sort of optional because it depends on the health of your organization. Some are really large, right? And we're going to think about these things, but make sure to have something in your disaster recovery plan about activating these alternative sites as needed. And last, this is arguably the most important, is our ISCPs, our Information System Contingency Plans. These are our specific recovery steps for specific systems. Our DCs, our core switches, applications, databases. The most important one is self-evident, but it's what step-by-step actions are needed to rebuild, restore, and recover the system. A lot of folks might know this in their head, but we gotta get it written down. Or some folks might have, and this is very common, have inherited their IT stack, right? There's probably very few among us who've built entirely the IT stack of our organization, right? So we're coming in, we're inheriting something that's there. We have to figure out how the heck would we rebuild this thing that we never built in the first place if it went down. We gotta figure this out. And remember, No matter what your colleagues tell you when you're doing the BIA exercise, that my application is the most important application, you have to restore this first. For IT, systems are typically recovered in order. We need our network stack and our identity provider to be up and running before typically we can get this application up and running. So what does an ISCP look like? Here I'm doing you a horrible disservice because it won't fit on a PowerPoint slide, but here's an example. Organization, hey, we love Wi-Fi. We want our Wi-Fi to work. We have wireless controllers. What's our ISCP for our wireless controller? Well, let's figure out what would it take for someone to use Wi-Fi. We need 3 things to happen. Skipping out some steps, but a user needs to be near an access point. The access point must be connected to a wireless controller. The wireless controller must be connected to the network. Exactly. See how we're breaking the chain, mapping the infrastructure. So we need all of that to be functioning for wireless to happen. Well, if one controller goes down, shouldn't matter because we're really smart and we have a redundant system in place. We have 2 controllers that are configured in an HA, a high availability system, active-active, so we're good. That's awesome. If one controller goes down for whatever reason. If both controllers go down, womp womp, we have a problem, right? Wireless just won't work. We have a 24-hour service contract. We'd call them. We would help to roll out the new system. IT and the vendor would work together. And then thankfully, we have backups of our wireless controller configs, and we would restore from those, right? Your ISCP is going to have all of this in there. Get your SME, the subject matter expert of that system, and document this stuff down. They typically live in an appendix of the DRP. So if something happens, great. Let's figure out what broke and now how to restore step by step. Does anyone have like an ISCP or have seen one or have worked on one, or is this like a totally foreign concept, or is this, of course it's intuitive, it's just, okay. I've seen a lot of disaster recovery plans and very few of them have this level of detail. But this is where we want to go. Reward time, congratulations, new quest complete. You don't just get intelligence now, folks, you get some defense. The ring of protection, why? Because we focused on contingencies. We're not just smarter, we're now a little bit safer. That's awesome. And I promised myself I'd leave time for questions, so how many more slides do I have? 60? Okay. Just kidding. Yeah, so, all right, this stuff is easy, you don't need me for this. So, yeah, last steps, sort of joking, but not really. How many times, I've worked with so many organizations, do you have a disaster recovery plan? Yeah. Does everyone on your disaster recovery team know that the plan exists? No. It's like you have the plan, you've wrote their name in it, and they don't, yeah, so, right. This stuff, very, very obvious. If you have a disaster recovery plan, make sure everyone who's listed in the plan knows what to do. When I worked in another organization, I found out the hard way that I was part of the emergency response plan. Not an IT thing, but I was called into some meeting like, you're the communications director for, response director for our, I was like, what? It's a 120-page plan. I was like, this is insane. So this stuff happens. Let's make sure we have a plan. Okay, so all DRT members should know at a minimum where the plan is, how to communicate with each other, right? What their roles and responsibilities are, no surprises for them. But all other stakeholders should hopefully know where the BCP is, right? Remember, they'll follow the BCP. How can we train stakeholders? We can test the plan. We know about tabletops, right? A good workshop earlier. You can at least run a tabletop once a year, dialogic scenario, run through that. But it would be awesome if we could do isolated or full-scale functional tests. Bring down a system, see what would happen. Leadership loves that, right? Can we have downtime? Unneeded downtime, let's do it, it'd be fun. Figure it out. Yeah, just pull out a wire and see what happens. Let's do it. So at least do one of these at least once a year. Make sure your plan is not rusty. And then update and maintain, of course. Every document, policy, IRP, DRP should have a revision history. It's literally the first thing I look when someone gives me a plan. I look in the table of contents for the revision history. And that tells me how it works.
One question, one thought on your testing of your plans, and I actually had this happen several years ago, especially if you It was a successful failure in our test. Yes, we were able to restore. No, nobody could log in.
It's awesome. So I definitely, yes, I want to leave time for questions here. So I'm going to, in 1 minute, rage through the final slides. It's going to be awesome. Quest 4 complete. Congratulations. We've done all of our quests. We know now difference between IRP, DRP, BCP, and how to build a disaster recovery plan. Okay, what is this project plan? How long would it take you to build a disaster recovery plan from scratch? To do all of these steps could take you a year. Depends on the size of your organization. This is a real thing. I work for an MSSP. I build disaster recovery plans all the time. This is a sample. This one took us 4 months to work with the organization, given their maturity. Notice the steps, right? Yellow is the identify. Blue is the step 2, the contingencies. Step 3 is the test and the train. So this is possible, but it does take time. 3 months, 4 months, a year. DRP template. ChatGPT exists now, so you don't care about, so there's templates everywhere. Make sure the template follows your disaster handling life cycle. This one, this is for an organization that wanted to follow their own disaster handling life cycle, not the one I shared, so this doesn't follow that one. But notice down here, the appendices is where a lot of stuff is. You got your network map, the breaking the chain stuff, and your ISCPs, and your backup schedule. Appendices should be thick. All right, you've leveled up. Congratulations. It's so hard in life to know when you've succeeded. In a video game, it's really easy. Makes it obvious, right? I'm looking at you all now and I see that golden halo of leveling up. So good job, you did it. So learning objectives, the teacher and me, did we accomplish all of these? How do we know that we accomplished them? Well, because you're gonna remember 2 slides. You're gonna burn them into your retinas. Slide 1, how do we know the difference between IRP, DRP, BCP, right here. Slide 2, these are the steps to make a DRP. That's it. Yeah.
So we met last night.
Yeah.
Some people know me as like, oh, hey, Dave's the games professor. Different idea. So one of the, thank you. Dave Schwartz, director for the School of Interactive Games and Media. We met last night, dinner. One of the aspects of my life is disaster resilience. There is a conference which is everything that you said for the physical and natural world. So it's called the Natural Hazards Workshop in Colorado. It's sort of the same place every year, connected to Boulder. This is more of a comment, not a question, is that world knows very little about your world and this world. And I have not been a terribly good emissary between these. So if people are curious about how this connects with emergency responders and how they perceive it, there's also Connections, the War Game Conference, which is very much about tabletop exercises. So I think they would love this, actually. I'm hoping you can present there. Thank you.
Other questions?
So once I get this all put together, I put this where?
Bill,
Where do I put this?
you got it right here, Bill. I'm just kidding. Yeah, so where does it go? Incident response is a concept of a war room, right? Where would you keep your stuff if your stuff goes down? How do you actually react to this? DRT members should all have it somewhere secure, paper copies, somewhere accessible if your IT stack goes down.
The importance is to understand that you need to have a physically accessible
Yep.
copy. I have had a situation where we went all through this, everything was all set, they put it up, they lost their computer room.
Yep.
Let's talk about our disaster recovery plan, and everybody's kind of like, well, it's on the computer.
Right, exactly.
Paper copy, there should be a USB drive copy, there should be one in a SharePoint somewhere where you don't need anything but raw internet to get to it. So those are kind of the guidelines that I like to use for this. Jason and I have worked on a couple of these together, so.
Yeah. Dave is my mentor for disaster recovery. So if this was great, it's because I'm a genius, and if it's bad, it's because, don't shoot the messenger, right?
Not that good a message.
Yeah. All I think one in the back here, yeah.
Yeah, do you think a DRP can be too complicated? Can it be too complex?
Yes.
And how do you rein in the complexity?
Phenomenal question. I've seen a lot of DRPs that are 120 pages long, and people proudly, smugly put it in front of you and like, yep, I got it all right here. And I'm like, do you know how to follow that, right? When a disaster occurs, am I naive enough to think that you're all gonna flip through to page 4 of your plan? No. The important thing to me is going through these steps and putting them somewhere, because that means you've thought about them and have them written down. After the fact, are you gonna flip through and study that thing? You should, at least once a year, read it front to back, right? The important thing to me is getting from A to B, not necessarily everything that's in B. So yeah, if it's too complicated, rein it back to what's actually realistic. Ask someone else, but like, does this make sense to you?
One thing I found that you can do when you have people that are motivated to put a lot of detail in, is push that down to the ISCPs, to the individual systems that they're the SMEs on. And that at least keeps it out of everybody else's way.
Actual plan's 10 pages, the appendix is 110.
There you go.
Exactly.
Then 120 pages isn't so bad.
Yep. Totally.
All right, I'm not seeing any other hands pop up. I do want to thank Jason very much for his time. We have a certificate and we have a certificate and an Amazon gift card for Jason. Thank you. Please go out to rochestersecurity.org, click the survey. That helps us get great things. We are not done. It's now break time and then closing remarks and awards.